to that. But let's look also at some artwork that we have from history as well. Here is a really interesting tomb painting. Like a lot of the wealthier classes in Egypt would decorate their tombs with all kinds of amazing artwork. And because
so no matter how he tries to play this, these are all people of color. These are melanated people. Light shade brown, dark shade brown. These are the Israelites coming into Egypt. You've got the Egyptians in front of them. So that would be the Egyptians here to the right of his skull. These with the beards here would be Israelites. They're brown-skinned people. These are real artifacts that come out of the temples in Egypt. These are brown-skinned people. These are not Caucasian. These are not so-called white people, different shades of red. These are brown-skinned people. The Israelites were different shades of brown, from a dark brown to a light brown. Today we refer to that as redskin. But you see, you can't get away from the fact that the Israelites were a nation of people of color.
The way in which it was preserved in the dark, we still have them, and they can be reconstructed with some clearer colors, as you see in the bottom image here. This is from 1900, before the Common Era, which would be, although we don't have a really clear date of when Abraham...
So this is 1900 BC, probably around the time of Abraham's time. So he knows that. He knows Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. These were people of color. These were melanated people, different shades of brown. No matter how you try to shake up the coin, my friend. But there you go. Like I said, thou shalt make thy own tongue to fall upon themselves. He's got no choice but to admit that the Israelites are a people of color.
Would have made his way down to the land of Egypt, but it's definitely in this neighborhood. And here you see the Amu, who are Western Asiatics, led by a Hyksos figure, which some scholars even identify with Hebrews. And they are...
Yeah, because we believe the Hyksos, which means shepherd kings, were Israelites that ruled Egypt for a period of time. Because the word Hyksos means shepherd kings.
Into Egypt, led by some Egyptian figures. The Egyptian figures on the right, the two of them, you can see seem to be somewhat darker in skin tone, but the Hyksos and the Amu, Western Asiatics, which would come from the land of Canaan, the land of Israel today, they seem to look pretty similar to what we saw of the Syrians and the Iraqi today. Looking at another example a little bit later, and this...
Except those in the picture, let's quickly go back to that picture. Those in the picture have got all, can you see their woolly afros? They don't have straight hair. These are afros. These are Negroes. These are all Israelites coming into Egypt. These are the Egyptians to the right. These are Israelites, sometimes referred to as the Hyksos. Can you see they've got their afros, their afros? These are brown-skinned people. These are not Caucasians, man. These are not, and he knows that. But he wants to make them seem like they are Arabic looking. He said they're similar complexions to the Arabs. Yeah, they were. Some were light-skinned brown. Some will be dark-skinned brown. But they all got their afros, their beautiful afros, and their beards. They're not got straight hair, like what you were showing with those Arabs, those Iraqis and Assyrians, because those Iraqis and Assyrians, a lot of them descend from the Ottomans, from the Turks and the Mongolians, all right? The Asiatic people from the East, because of their colonization. We're talking about people that lived before. So they're going amongst the Egyptians here. So you can't escape that.
The Amu, Western Asiatics, which would come from the land of Canaan, the land of Israel today, they seem to look pretty similar to what we saw of the Syrians and the Iraqi today. Looking at another example a little bit later, and this would have been...
And remember, there's over 500,000, I did this before, there's over between 500,000 and 1.5 million, this is about 1.5 million so-called African Iraqis that live in Iraq today. 1.5 million. I think the population of Iraq is about 25 million. They said 1.5 million of them are of African Iraqi descendants, meaning they probably all go back to Nimrod, to the Hamites that are living in Iraq today. Those are the original Iraqis.
or less in the time that Exodus is understood to be set. This is the tomb of Rechmire, 1450 before the Common Era, and this is a depiction of slaves in various stages of the brick-making process. And as you
So who was making bricks in Egypt? The Israelites. Look at his hair. These are black people. Look at his lips and his mouth. Look at his hair. This is his curly hair. Look at his hair. Look at his hair. We were the ones that were making brick. Hold on. Let me just quickly bring this up here. Brick. We were the ones that was making bricks in Egypt. We were the slaves. And it says here, Exodus 1 and 4. Let's go to this one here. Exodus 5 and 14. And the officers of the children of Israel, which Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over them, were beaten and demanded, wherefore have ye not fulfilled your task in making bricks, both yesterday and today, as herefore? All right, it's telling you right here. Ye shall, it says, and Pharaoh commanded the same taskmasters of the people and officers, saying, ye shall no more give the people straw to make brick. What people are those? Those are the Israelites. As herefore, let them go and gather straw for themselves. Talking about the children of Israel. He says, where was it? So it says there, and the tale of the bricks which they did make hereof, ye shall lay upon them, ye shall not diminish them, for they be idle. Therefore they cry, saying, let us go sacrifice to our power. Let their more work be laid upon men, that they may labor therein, and let them not regard vain words. And the taskmasters of the people went out, and their officers, and they spake to the people, saying, thus says Pharaoh, I will not give you straw. What do they need straw for? They needed straw to make bricks. So when he jumps on it, it says, then the officers of the children of Israel came and cried unto Pharaoh, saying, wherefore dealest thou thus with thy servants? There is no straw given unto the servants, and they say to us, make brick. And behold, thy servants are beaten, but the fault is in thine own hand. So these were the Israelites making bricks. Do these look like so-called white people? Look at them. Look at them. Look at their hair. Look at their color. That's a light brown, darker brown. These are Israelites in captivity during the times of Moses, making bricks for Pharaoh. So he knows that. This is why he's showing you this.
Or less in the time that Exodus is understood to be set. This is the tomb of Rechmire.
See, in the time that Exodus, see what he said? In the time that Exodus was meant to have taken place. What we're reading from Exodus. Israel's labor increased. This is during the time of Exodus. Verse 3, and they said, that God, the power of the Hebrews, the Israelites, has met with us. Let us go, we pray thee, 3 days' journey into the desert and sacrifice unto Yahweh, our power, lest he fall upon us with pestilence or with his sword. So this is the time of the Exodus. We're reading out the book of Exodus. So they know that. The devils know.
What we saw of the Syrians and the Iraqi today. Looking at another example a little bit later, and this would have been more or less in the time that Exodus is understood to be set. This is the tomb of Rechmire, 1450 before the Common Era, and this is a depiction of slaves in various stages.
I know those so-called European Jews, boy, when they see this video of their professor showing them that the true Israelites are people of color. I know they're pulling off those wigs. I know the women are pulling off their wigs and the men are pulling on them friggin' hair that they got. Trust me, this must be ripping the heart out of the Ashkenazi community to see one of their own show you that the biblical Israelites are a people of color. Negroes.
The brick-making process. And as you can see, there's clearly two different complexion families represented here. It looks like African slaves and, once again, these Western Asiatics.
Did you hear the devil? He said they look like African slaves. They're not African slaves, they're Israelites and Western Asiatic. So he doesn't want to actually say those are the Israelites in bondage. He said they look like African slaves, Hamites, and Asiatics, where we know the Bible only talks about the children of Israel being the main slaves of the pharaohs during this period before they were freed by the Most High via Moses. But that's what the devil does. He tells you what the picture's showing. Then he says, oh, but these are not the actual Israelites. These are Africans and these are Asiatic. Come on, man. That's such BS. But he knows.
These Hyksos or Canaanites, they're not specifically identified as Jews, but we
hear that they're not specifically identified as Jews, just like they're not specifically identified as Africans or Asiatics. But yet, the Bible, the history tells us the only people that was making bricks during this time for the pharaohs were the Israelites, not the Hamites, not the Asiatics, the Moabites, or the Ammonites, or any other nation of people, right? Not the Canaanites, but the Israelites. The Bible tells us that. History tells us that. But this is how they tap dance around the truth when they're showing you the truth. What a devil.
They're not specifically identified as Jews, but we get an impression of a mixed population coming together to build the storehouses of Pithom and Ramses. Those could very easily have been Jews. And they
now the devil said those could easily have been Jews. Because he knows they are. Because they were the only people that was building the storehouses, the brick houses, the cities, the pyramids, were the Israelites. So he knows that. So now he says it. Well, they could have easily, after tap dancing around the truth, he tells you the truth. Listen again.
Mixed population coming together to build the storehouses of Pithom and Ramses. Those could very easily have been Jews. And they seem to look a little bit different than the apparent Nubians. The figure leaning at the right actually seems to have a blue eye. It's hard to tell.
Yeah, the devil trying to throw in that little blue eye, right? That's probably just some decorated thing. He knows those are the Jews. He knows the only history that talks about people making bricks, just like what we read back here in Exodus. The only history of people making bricks for the pharaohs were the Israelites. That's the only history. Read Exodus chapter 5. We're the only ones that it's got here. Ye shall no more give the people, the Israelites, the Hebrews, straw to make brick. As herefore, let them go and gather straws for themselves. And the tail of the bricks, which they did make herefore, ye shall lay upon them. So we were the only people where the Bible talks about that was in captivity, specifically making bricks. You see, these pictures were left for our heritage, for us to see these things, to know and feel the realism of the scriptures of who we are. These evidence that the Lord left in Pharaoh's temples was for the true children of Israel to see. Because no other nation was spoken about making bricks and building cities for the Pharaohs, but the Hebrews, which were the Israelites. But listen on.
That's just a degradation of the color, but they clearly have a somewhat lighter complexion, but they still don't quite look like Caucasians. And we'll get to how that comes up later.
Oh, he said, but they don't look like Caucasians. Wonder why? Because the Israelites are not Caucasian. But thank you, Professor Henry Abramson. Listen on.
Here we have finally a picture where we can say these are definitely Jews. You can tell.
Okay, so now he's saying he knows these are definitely Jews because this represents the captivity of the Israelites under the Assyrian king Shalmaneser V. I think if you go to, I think it's 2 Kings chapter 17, it talks about that. Shalmaneser, when the northern kingdom went to captivity and King Hoshea was the king. So these are Lakish reliefs. So he knows 100%, as all the archaeologists and the specialists know, right, that these are the real Jews of the Bible that are on these Lakish reliefs. Listen what he has to say. Then I'm going to show you some more close-ups.
All their luggage, they got wholesale. No, I shouldn't say those things. Comes up later. Here we have finally a picture where we can say these are definitely Jews. You can tell because all their luggage they got wholesale. No, I shouldn't say those things. That's terrible. I can't help it. But this is unfortunately a sad image. This is a part of the Lachish reliefs that were commissioned by the Assyrian attacker of Israel, who displaced many of the Jews out of the land of Israel to Assyria. This is in the period of time which is associated with the 10 lost tribes. And you can see it's very poignant. There's a whole family here, including children, and mothers are riding on these wagons, holding their young infants in their arms. It's very touching in many ways. The Jewish figure on the left, it's impossible to assign a skin color with this kind of representation, but he is clearly bearded. In other parts of this particular relief, you can see that they tend to have like more curly hair, which is interesting.
Did you hear that? So he says it's hard for him to put the skin color on what skin color they are, but he says in the other reliefs that they've got shows that they have curly hair. Now the only people that has curly woolly hair are so-called black people, Negroes, right? He knows that. So, but yet he said it's hard to put a skin color on them, but he knows by looking at the Lakish reliefs that they have curly. Listen to him again. Hold on. Then I'm going to show you.
In other parts of this particular relief, you can see that they tend to have like more curly hair, which is interesting, but it's still impossible to determine specifically what color they were. What I think we say with some, assurance is that the preponderance of the evidence suggests that they were not white like Caucasians were.
There you go. Praises to Jehovah, Hashem Yahushua, Hashem Rekah Kodash. He had no choice but to tell you that upon the evidence that we have seen and that we know exists, that they could never have been so-called Caucasian people. Let's hear this again from the devil's mouth. I don't want to call him the devil. Forgive me, take that back. From the professor's mouth. I don't want to be sounding rude here, all right? Because we're here to edify you with the truth. All right, so I take that back. I don't mean sometimes when I refer to him as a devil, I just mean he's deceiving you. All right, I'm not saying that he's got two horns coming out of his head, because the word devil just means to deceive. All right, we're going to go about this in a mild-mannered way, because this is all about the truth. So I want you to listen to the professor again. All right, Henry Abramson, right, PhD, professor of history, right, Jewish history. Listen to him once more.
Assurance is that the preponderance of the evidence suggests that they were not white like Caucasians were. Assurance is that the preponderance of the evidence suggests that they were not white like Caucasians were. They weren't like, Scarlett Johansson kind of white. They looked a little bit more like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a famous Hispanic individual in popular culture. They look probably a little bit more like Middle Eastern people.
See that? Look, it's hard for him to say they look like niggers. He said they look more like Middle Eastern people, right? When they were actually Negroes, so-called black people, right? He was even trying to lean to Spanish, but he knows they're not white. He likes using Middle Eastern because they still got a bit of straight hair, and some of them are very fair-skinned. As I just said to you, there's over 1.5 million Afro-Africans that live in, African Iraqis that live in Iraq, right? You go to Yemen, literally all the Yemenis are so-called Negroes, all right, in the Middle East. You'll find a lot of them in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait as well. But it's hard for him to actually use the word Negro, because then he's have to say, well, they are those people that are in the Americas on the slave ships. So I want to quickly show you. This is what he was showing you here. It's the siege of Lachish, right? 701. Sennacherib, king of the universe, king of Assyria, sits on his throne, and spoils as Lachish are paraded before it in the British Museum. All right?
They were not white like Caucasians were. They weren't like, Scarlett Johansson kind of white. They looked a little bit more like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a famous Hispanic individual in popular culture. They look probably a little bit more like Middle Eastern people. In terms of biblical texts, there are a few kind of interesting passages that refer to possibly darker skin, in the sense that they were at some level understood to be other, but at the same time they're also part of the community as well. Moses, for example, in Numbers 12, there's a whole discussion of the fact that he married a woman from Cush, Cush being the ancient term for Ethiopia. So on the one hand, the fact that she's identified differently, either by her place of geographic origin or possibly by her skin color, because Cushite could easily mean an Ethiopian colored woman as opposed to an Ethiopian origin woman. But at the same time, she's Moses's wife.
Well, we know the Cushites are so-called black people. The Cushites are African, and they go back to Ham, all right? Cush is one of Ham's sons. Anyway.
I mean, you can't get much more into Jewish royalty than marrying Moses. So even though she is identified as somewhat other, she is also intrinsically the same. And you also have this passage in Song of Songs, which is a highly allegorical representation of the communication between...
Now listen carefully to what he says here, all right? We read this out earlier, Songs of Solomon, right? Chapter 1, verse 5, all right? Listen carefully what he says here, all right? Sorry for the interval there, because we broke off. I had to reboot the PC, the laptop. It just locked up completely, all right? So lucky for that. But listen carefully to what he says here, family.
In the Jewish people, that's how it's understood in the rabbinic tradition. And this passage here, the figure representing the Jewish people says, Shechora ani v'na'ava, which is translated, I am black, but comely. Or but beautiful. That vav of v'na'ava.
So you can't deny what it says there, right? I am black, which is shakar in the Hebrew, but comely. Shakar, black, dark skin, but comely, beautiful, right? Now listen carefully to what the professor says here.
And comely or but comely could be translated as an and or a but the context here implies that it is a but, meaning I am different, I am black, but nevertheless I am beautiful. And most importantly, this is a metaphor referring to the entire Jewish people. So it's hard to be...
Do you hear what he said? And we've always told you that. This is a metaphor referring to the whole Israelite Jewish community. Daughters of Jerusalem is a poetic way of referring to the children of Israel. So he's telling you that he's saying that I am black but comely, O you daughters of Jerusalem, talking about the whole 12 tribes of Israel, of a nation of so-called black people, and beautiful. Because he's talking about the daughters of Jerusalem, the 12 tribes. Listen again carefully what he says.
Context here implies that it is a but, meaning I am different, I am black, but nevertheless I am beautiful. And most importantly, this is a metaphor referring to the entire Jewish people. So it's hard to be any more inside than that, despite the difference in skin color. So that's to summarize what we know from the data about Jewish skin color, based on some common sense, some current ethnographic data, some biblical texts, and what limited archaeological evidence we have. So the next